Quem tem uma empresa... segura. Com métodos inovadores, parcerias, soluções inteligentes, visão de mercado, conteúdos estratégicos e muita qualificação, a Apex Brasil é referência na promoção de exportações, internacionalização de empresas e atração de investimentos estrangeiros. A agência também atua de forma coordenada com atores públicos e privados em setores estratégicos, tanto para o desenvolvimento da competitividade das empresas quanto para o fortalecimento da economia brasileira. Se é conexão com o mundo de oportunidades no mercado internacional que a sua empresa procura, é o apoio da Apex Brasil que ela precisa. Acesse o mundo. Acesse a Apex Brasil. Quem tem uma empresa sabe quanto tempo é valioso. Por isso, a Apex Brasil apoia empresas brasileiras que querem exportar seus produtos, atrair investimentos estrangeiros ou empreender no exterior. Com a Apex Brasil, as empresas brasileiras têm um apoio estratégico para mandar seus produtos e serviços para fora do país de uma forma inteligente e segura. Com métodos inovadores, parcerias, soluções inteligentes, visão de mercado, conteúdos estratégicos e muita qualificação, a Apex Brasil é referência na promoção de exportações, internacionalização de empresas e atração de investimentos estrangeiros. A agência também atua de forma coordenada com atores públicos e privados em setores estratégicos, tanto para o desenvolvimento da competitividade das empresas quanto para o fortalecimento da economia brasileira. Se é conexão com o mundo de oportunidades no mercado internacional que a sua empresa procura, é o apoio da Apex Brasil que ela precisa. Acesse o mundo. Acesse Apex Brasil.
Participants, I am honored, at the same time sad to be filling in as a chair for our esteemed friend who should be in this place, Dr. Sérgio Trindade, a great promoter of biofuels as an element of development and welfare. Unfortunately, Sérgio was infected by the COVID and passed away in March 2020, a great loss for all of us citizens in this beautiful planet. Among his many works, he could highlight the creation of and permanent leadership of the International Symposium on Alcohol Fuels, ISAF, a series of 23 conferences with events on all continents started in 1976 in Sweden and the most recent happening in 2018 in China. As he defined it, the ISAF is more than conference. It is a process of 4 decades of life that aims to mobilize stakeholders of alternative fuels to continue looking for paths to sustainable mobility. In fact, ISAF's proceedings constitute a dense and consistent set of studies that reinforce the opportunity and sustainability of these energy alternatives that we are going to discuss in the frame of the new frontiers right now. Most probably, the last article for Sergio was an evaluation of bioenergy potential in developing countries, taking into account the conclusions of the Scope Bioenergy and Sustainability Report. He was a great champion of the ideas that underline the use of bioenergy in emerging markets. This was done as a collaborative effort launched in China with Glaucio Souza and myself as co-authors. With his good humor and ease of making friends, his deep knowledge of bioenergy related topics, with a formidable network and permanent mood for traveling, Sergio will always be in our good memories. Let's to start our plenary session. Well, finally, we're starting our plenary, live plenary, and I have the honor to coordinate with my friend Marcelo Menossi and focusing a very interesting aspect of bioenergy, in some sense, some paradoxical aspect, which is the fact that there are potential, there are competitiveness, there are a lot of benefits, but these markets are still untapped. They are expecting some uh, political measure, some movement to put they forward. So this is our emerging markets that are ready, almost ready to grow up. But how to push this, no? So to develop these aspects today, we have the honor to have with us a good set of experienced, distinguished speakers. Okay, we have people from Latin America, people from Africa, presenting real experiences and a particular vision of someone that are living this situation to put these ideas in practices. No, uh, I, I, as you have seen in the beginning, this is an old and relevant topic in the discussion of bioenergy in the last decades. Sergio Trindade was one of the uh, person that pushed this, and it is an opportunity to remember him. Now, our activities today will be the speakers presenting their presentations, and then we have some time in the end for Q&A session to take some lessons and try to wrap up these presentations. No, to start our plenary, the first speaker is from Kenya. Is Stephen Karikezi. It's an old friend, colleague. I have the honor to visit him and know some experience in the field. He is the African energy specialist engineer with a very large curriculum. You can see in the session of speakers in UVA more detailed information about his career. But what could be mentioned now, it is a person with qualified uh, qualification in industrial management, and he has written and co-authored and edited more than 100 publication journal articles and papers, always dealing with sustainable energy, bioenergy, renewables, and many different countries, most of them in Africa. Another aspect of Carriquez that I would like to highlight is the fact that he's currently coordinating a major GF project, Cogeneration for Africa, which is designed to promote cogeneration. I suppose that you are going to see more information about this in his presentation. And looking for encourage and promote the energy sector regulation to go towards the energy efficiency by biomass cogeneration. So please, Caricaz, the floor is yours now. Then I will introduce further the other speakers. Please.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to BBEST for this kind invitation to present some of our experiences in our region in Africa. I think starting with the first slide, as you can see, what we have done here, we are presenting a slightly broader perspective of bioenergy options in sub-Saharan Africa, including a range of options that are available within the agricultural sector. And I'll explain the reasoning why we did that to some extent. But the most important thing to understand why bioenergy is interesting in Africa is because agriculture is very dominant. And that is what the next slides will show, that essentially it is a major employer of over 70% of our population are reliant on agriculture. And it's a very important source of exports. And it can account for up to half the GDP of many sub-Saharan African countries. So for us, bioenergy allows us to tap this important sector, which not only can be an important economic sector, but also support a large number of people in terms of employment and livelihoods. But unfortunately, as the next slide will show, although it is an important sector, it has not done as well as it could. This is a slightly old slide, but it shows exports, agricultural exports, comparing sub-Saharan Africa, which has a population of almost 800 million people, is currently less than what Thailand on its own exports. So you can see that we have not really made much progress in terms of percentage of exports that we account for worldwide. So clearly this sector, however it is important, is not doing as well as it could, and we feel that bioenergy options development can truly make a difference. And that is what the next slide will show, is that it can make a difference in two ways. First of all, it can make the agriculture sector itself more competitive by reducing energy costs and providing another revenue stream. But also importantly, it can be a source of financing for the power sector, because as you know, we do have a significant shortage of capital to finance renewable energy in our region. And by integrating agroenergy and bioenergy together with the power sector, you can indeed mobilize significant resources. Now, my presentation will focus on 4 models we think could work within the setting of developing bioenergy, and that is summarized in the next slides. There are essentially 4 models that I would like to discuss in my presentation. And the first one is looking at bioenergy and renewable energy development, where the agro-industry uses its own resources to meet its own needs, its own energy and electricity needs. That is model 1, and that one we found it's relatively easy to do because we are dealing with essentially just one industry. The second one is where not only does it meet its own needs, as model 2, it also exports it to the grid. That's a little bit more challenging, but we feel that there are opportunities there that can be exploited. Then the third one is where you then you supply to the estate employees and dependents and own use. And then the fourth one is where you actually go beyond the agro-industry fence, so to speak, and actually connect surrounding communities and so on. So this is where it's a little bit more complicated. So you can see that as we move from model 1, model 2, model 3, and model 4, it becomes easier, more difficult, and more challenging. So I will go through each model and provide an example of a case experience we've had within our project, which I think the chairman has rightly pointed out we've been involved in, the Cogeneration for Africa project. So starting with model 1, this is where the next slide will show is where basically the renewable or bioenergy option is actually developed by the agro-industry for its own use. And in many cases, it's to generate electricity and heat to process its own crops. And the example I will provide, and the case example we've worked with, is in the next slide. And basically it's looking at flower industry. And there are 2 examples we've worked on. One at the bottom picture is where they use a little biogas unit in a flower industry to meet their electricity needs and heat needs. And the second one is solar PV, so that they combine both solar PV and biogas and are able to meet much of the needs of their flour industry. Flour is a very important industry in Africa and in Kenya specifically. It's actually one of the major exports sector, and it generates a fair amount of biomass which can be used in biogas. Now the next slide, we look at the next model, which is model 2, where essentially the industry generates not only power and heat for its own use and processing, but also exports to the grid any surplus, and may very well then also export any biofuels it can produce. And that is the next example that I'll provide, which has been very successful, which is the next slide. It's essentially the model country for the rest of the region. Mauritius has been extremely successful in developing its cogeneration industry to such an extent that the sugar industry on its own provides over half the electricity that the country uses. So it's become a major utility player. And in some respect, the revenue from electricity are significantly more reliable than that from the sugar sector itself, where prices can fluctuate tremendously. And the cogen project that the chairman referred to that I've been working on essentially looked at the example of Mauritius and tried to replicate it across the mainland region. And that is where the next slide will come in. And one of the examples we managed to achieve in this particular cogeneration project is a project that developed a cogeneration plant in Kakira Sugar in Uganda. We helped to finance some of the feasibility studies. And they started with 3 megawatt, which was a fairly small unit, and eventually they put in a 60 megawatt unit, and the total power generation is now 51 megawatts, which is one of the largest cogeneration units in East Africa. And they're able to supply excess power, 20 megawatt into the grid, and over time they've now increased it to 32 megawatt. So that's become a very good revenue stream for them, and not only for the industry itself, but also for the outgrowers, because a lot of the sugar is produced by outgrowers, not just on the core estate of the sugar industry. And that is the next slide that you see, showing how the outgrowers have benefited from it. And one of the outputs that they've managed to move, in addition to cogeneration, is actually produce ethanol. So they're using now a vinasse biogas-based cogeneration unit, 0.4 megawatt, which powers the ethanol plant. And the ethanol is initially supposed to be industrial ethanol, but eventually they hope to get into transportation ethanol. And the benefits to the outgrowers, which is the next slide, shows that significant number of outgrowers have benefited. Back about 10 years back, they only had about 8,000 outgrowers. This has now grown significantly, and the beneficiaries, as you can see, have grown substantially. So it has significant effects on low-income communities. Now, coming on to the next slide, which will show now the other options that you can look in addition to the sugar industry. We've seen significant potential also in the tea industry, primarily first with small hydro, because many of them are sited near rivers, but a number of them also can do cogen unit because they have their own biomass plantations. They use the biomass basically to dry the tea leaves. So they can do a combination of cogeneration and small hydro. The last row there shows one of the major tea company, James T. Finlay Company, which has done that. It has developed its own cogen unit as well as small hydro unit. But then the next set of slides will show some of the planned small hydro developments in the tea industries that are actually ongoing. And eventually they'll include a cogen unit that will be biomass fueled in most of these tea factories. And that's also the next slide, which also lists some of the planned tea factories in Kenya that plan to develop first small hydro and then move on to cogeneration. Now the next slide will show model 3, where essentially not only is the estate generating power for its own need, but it's also trying to meet the needs of its own employees and dependents within the estate itself. And that also institutionally is a little easier because it does not involve going outside the fence of the agro industry. And the example we have here, which is the next slide, which will show is the James Finlay, which I talked about. And they have a fairly large estate, one of the largest tea estate in the country, 11,000 hectares, some 5 tea factories with flower farms. So they employ a very large number of people. and they have managed essentially to put in a cogen plant, which is fueled by their own tree plantations, wood-fueled tree plantation. And that is the next slide that will show a picture of, it's a fairly small unit, not very large, it's less than 1 megawatt. But as you can see, it benefits not only the industry itself, because it's not a major user of electricity, but it produces a lot of heat, which is used to dry the tea leaves. So it's a cogen unit, basically technically designed to produce more heat and less electricity to meet the demand of the tea industry. And you can see that a large number of employees, some 12,000, are dependent on this tea industry, and 60,000 beneficiaries, including their children and relatives. And all of them get electricity from this particular cogen unit, in addition for it meeting the needs of the tea industry. And they've moved ahead. In addition to this particular biomass-fueled cogen unit, they're now also developing a biogas plant, which is now operational, and that's the next slide, which uses waste from their flour outputs, flour waste production. Basically, when you process flowers, there's a lot of tea leaves, and a lot of them come here, and also some of the tea trimmings that they have not been used in the tea plantations that occur each time they do a new plantation are brought into this biogas unit, and it produces, as you see, a very modest amount of power, 160 kilowatt, but it makes a big difference to the employees in terms of the electricity needs in rural areas. Now, the next slide will show that once you have this expertise, technical expertise in this agro-industry, they become quite innovative. One of the things they have done in this particular tea factory is that one of the big consumer of energy was the transportation of tea leaves around the estate itself. They used to have a large fleet of trucks using tremendous amount of diesel to carry the tea leaves across the estate. But now with their own power, they actually establish a cable system, a ropeway system, where tea leaves are transported across their tea estate without use of vehicles back to the factory where it is processed. And that saved them a lot. It was a very quick, very profitable investment for them, a 2-year payback. And as a result, now they use very little transportation fuel. So that shows that these agro-industry, once they have this expertise, they can begin to develop other sectors. They can get into not only biomass, but also things like transportation fuels. Now, the next slide will show the last model, which is a much more difficult model to implement, where not only is the agro-industry developing energy plants to meet its own needs, but goes beyond the estate, outside communities, and help them to connect and raise the electrification levels. What we've seen there is there's not been as much success, but there's been some interesting pilot schemes where they have provided solar PV kits to surrounding communities, and also help them to use their own small-scale biomass plantations and cooking technologies so that they become much more cleaner and more efficient. So I will now summarize in the next slide those 4 models. As we said, model 1 is its own use. Model 2 is export to the grid and possibility of producing ethanol for transport sector to sell to the transportation sector. Model 3 is where not only does the agro-industry meet its own needs, but also meets the needs of its employees. And largely is where it goes beyond the estate and try and connect and assist the communities that are surrounding these estates. Now, what we have found, all these models, they face one major challenge, which is the challenge of feedstock security. Because of land ownership and the difficulties of smallholders, because many of them are based on outgrower system, you do get a challenge in being able to get reliable feedstock for long periods of time, which is different, of course, in countries like Brazil, which have very large estates that essentially own the land. In many of our cases, the land is owned by smallholders and they are organized, and getting good feedstock security is a challenge. And of course, there are institutional issues that when you get into energy, you are crossing policy boundaries, and that can be quite a challenge for all these models. The next challenge that we have seen in the next slide, which relates really to Model 1 specifically, is that if you're not careful, when you generate electricity for your own use, the utility may feel that it is losing that market. So it's often useful to work with the utility so that they are aware that indeed this power plant is coming on stream and include it in their power master plan. The second challenge we've seen with Model 2 is when you're exporting to the grid, the negotiating decent feed-in tariffs can be quite a challenge. And this is one of the things we did in the Cogen for Africa project. We used the examples of Mauritius and helped them to establish, I think, decent feed-in tariff, which allows investments to take place and allows the sale of excess electricity to the grid. Now, the third challenge, which I'll mention in next slide, which is related to Model 3, is when you're trying to connect to your own employees, it can be quite a challenge because they may not be willing to pay as much as would be expected to get the feedback and to pay back the investment that is required. So that can be a difficulty, but over time, people have learned how to overcome it. And sometimes they can do overloading, so you can have meters that can control the overloading of household putting in very large water pumps, for example, and overload these small installations in rural areas. For Model 4, moving beyond the electrification of within the estate and going beyond the estate boundaries, I think the key challenge there is to work with the rural electrification authorities so that they feel that you're working in partnership and within the rural electrification program. So those are the four challenges we feel we have seen in the examples we've tried and where we've worked with agro-industries. But we really feel that for bioenergy to work well in our region, we need to think beyond biofuels. We need to think not just fuels for transportation, but also think of bioenergy for electricity generation, bioenergy for direct heat applications. These are some of the low-hanging fruits that can allow one to get this market up and running in what is often a difficult investment environment of sub-Saharan Africa. Now, my last slide, which I'll present the next slide, is basically to summarize in terms of what are the options and what is the potential. We think there is significant renewable energy and bioenergy potential in agro-industry. That we've seen and we've realized it in the projects we have been doing. And we can see they can deliver significant benefits to agro-industries. They can lower their costs, they can generate new revenue stream, and indeed create tremendous employment in the rural areas. And the third thing, which is very important for our region, and may not be so familiar in Brazil, where technical expertise is not such a big challenge, but we have difficulties getting the right expertise and technicians and engineers, planners, and so on. So we find working with agro-industry, many of them already have the engineering skills to implement these projects. And a lot of them can even raise financing through their own banking relationships. So they can provide a platform for developing a whole range of bioenergy options. But in terms of widening access, that is providing rural electrification to rural areas, we think that's a much more difficult challenge because it's a business that is a little bit beyond what agro-industries are designed to do. So there has been some challenge, but we've seen some pilot successes which can be built on. I think with that, I will stop and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity and to the organizers of BBEST for an excellent initiative. Thank you.
Oh, Stephen, thank you so much. It is a very interesting introduction of our discussion later. As you can see, bioenergy is for sure the most complex and diversified energy systems that you can get. If you compare with, for instance, wind energy, wind power, and this kind, it's very simple to put a wind machine and collect it. But if we're talking about bioenergy, we're talking about a diversity of feedstocks, including feedstock not coming from the field, directly from the agro-industry, as Stephen showed us. So what is frequently considered as a complexity, an intrinsic complexity, and difficulties to deal, I agree that is really complex and diversified scenario, we can recognize that is also an upside, an advantage, that we can get advantage in several levels as putting some new dynamic in the agro-industry and this kind of opportunities that should be promoted. See that we are not talking about biofuels, no, but there are also biofuels. And we'll be back in this complexity after the speech. But now let's to hear from Aida Lorenzo, okay? It's a pleasure to have Aida with us. I have been following Aida activities in the last 20 years, I guess. She was born in Guatemala. She's an industrial engineer with a master in business administration and degree in environmental management also. She's the general manager of Renewable Fuels Association of Guatemala, and is in this institution, this interesting institution. She is more than dealing, she is fighting to promote biofuels in not only Guatemala, but in all Central America region, okay? It's interesting to see how the things are developing there and the big hopes that we can have in these opportunities that a country which is a large producer of ethanol are still waiting to introduce ethanol blends. Let's hear from Aida and try to understand what they are doing there. Please, Aida, the floor is yours. It's my pleasure to have you with us.
No, thank you, Professor Horta. The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much for the invitation, especially all the organizers. It is an honor to be here. I'm going to start with my presentation. Basically, the first slide is I'm going to tell you what have I done during these 15 years, our association. Next slide, please. Basically, our association, we call it ACR because it's called the Renewable Fuels Association of Guatemala. It's a private, non-profit, technical, and multidisciplinary association that promotes the production and use of biofuels in Guatemala and the Central American region, as Professor Horta said. Next, please. This is an international event, but maybe someone doesn't know where Guatemala is located. We are located in Central America region. Our neighbors are Mexico, El Salvador, and Honduras. Basically, we are a small country. We have 16.6 million inhabitants, 108 square kilometers, and we have 22 provinces, and half of our population is indigenous. On the next slide, we are going to see what is the Guatemalan fuels context, because I'm going to talk especially of the ethanol market and the ethanol potentials that Guatemala has. Basically, Guatemala imports 1% of its fossil fuels. Basically, in last year were 46 million barrels. The import cost was 1,800 million US dollars. It's a lot of money for us. Basically, we have 5 import brokers with the international brands that you already knew. Here in Guatemala, we have a free market. We have 1,500 gas stations and 4 million vehicles. So you can imagine what is the size of our country. And but basically today, our current average gasoline price is $3.50 per gallon. On the next slide, we're going to see what is the ethanol industry here in Guatemala. Basically, we have 5 distilleries in our country. We have 13 sugar mills, but only 5 distilleries. Basically, we have 65 million gallons installed capacity per year. We use basically molasses as a raw material. And this is curious, as Professor says, always in the case of Guatemala, it's a paradox because we import 1%, it's 100% of our fossil fuels, and we also export 100% of our pure ethanol, basically to the European Union and the US, especially California. And why is that? Basically, because we produce certified sustainable ethanol, at least 80% of GHG reduction. Basically, we have different certifications like ISCC, like Bonsucro, and the low carbon fuel standard of the EPA. The industry at least generate 20,000 direct and indirect jobs, and that is the Guatemala industry. So that is really important to know how it's going. How are we on the blending program? That's what I'm going to talk about. On the next slide, as many of our countries, we have signed different agreement, politics, and commitments. I'm going to tell you some of these. Basically, Guatemala have signed the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement. We have an NDC of 11.2 GHG emission reduction for 2030. We have a climate change law. We also have a national action plan for climate change. We have a national energy policy. And recently we got a low emission development strategy that's called LEDS. So one of these, in this strategy, IETM 10 blend is a prioritized strategy. These studies shows that it can contribute at least to 233,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. That it means like 3.8 national goal for 2030. So that means that Guatemala needs the ethanol for reduce its GHG emissions. Next slide. What have we done with a lot of these years? Basically, we have done different activities. We have a pilot plant in 2015 using different blends. We have participated on the public strategies development. This is really important because it is really important to see the importance of include renewable fuels in the transportation sector. Basically, in our country, it is focused on the electrical sector, but we have done at all nothing about the transport sector. We have made different trainings, seminars, webinars. We have made different local studies, so financial studies, environmental studies, social studies, a lot of studies. Of course, promotion activities. Next, please. Last year, we made a pilot plant. We call it Movilidad Verde or Green Mobility. And maybe you should be thinking, why are you testing or doing pilot plants here in Guatemala? That's kind of weird. Yes, I am sure that is weird. But with different governments, we have changed government last year. So they say that it's really important to have their own data to have to implement this kind of program. So we use 34 vehicles, 10 weeks with E5 and E10 blend. And we specifically focus on the exhaust emission measurement. This was made because it was a route to scientifically verify the results and benefits of the use of ethanol in gasoline with different brands and models. And this is was really important. This pilot plan was led by the Energy and Mine Ministry. They really understood that this is really important for our country. It was financed by the IDB. We have also the support of the municipality of the Guatemala City, and the main actor was the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala that developed this study. On the next slide, we are going to see what was the process of this process. Of course, we had the results that we were expected, but it was really important to us to have these two stages here in the pilot plan. Basically, we started with mechanical evaluation, and that is really, really important for us because for all the cars, they couldn't blame the ethanol blending. So we start basically with the E5 we also start with the emission evaluations, and then we changed to E10, and we did the final mechanic and ethanol and reduction and emissions analysis. And of course, we have the results that we were expecting. Next. This is what's really important, because we have the support of 3 ministries. The Energy and Mines, of course, they were leading this project. Also, the Environmental Ministry, and also the Ministry of Economy. This is historical because it's the first time that we have the support of 3 ministries. And we also have 2 congressmen using the EcoPower. I didn't tell you that we call this fuel EcoPower, the blending E5 or E10, we call it EcoPower. And we also had the importers, Vehicle Importers Association, and we also have the media participating. Next, please. So it was really important to have different brands, because they said, no, maybe it will work with different brands. Maybe it won't work with antiques vehicles, but basically we use vehicles from 1987 and 2020. For also, obviously, for the association, we knew where the results will be. But especially the ministries and the tractors, no, they really want to have these results. On the next slide, we are going to see the results of the reduction of the combustion emission reductions. As we knew, as all the world knew, but basically we, with the E10 blending, basically all the reductions drop, as you can see in this graphic. And of course, this is really important for not only for the environmental ministry, but also for the health ministry, because that means that we can improve our air quality. Next. We have a lot of myths, various questions and challenges here in Guatemala. It's kind of tired to deal with it. We also have the food versus fuel myth. We have that there will be deforestation because of the ethanol production. Basically, we are supported by the international sustainability certifications, as also with the pesticides. We have the ethanol production and contamination. That it is a question here. I don't know how it's happening this, but they are questioning if the ethanol will increase the octet number. There is maybe an issue here with the car importers and motorcycles. It is a real theme that all the import terminals will invest for the capex inversion. The gas station will need to invest, not because of ethanol. They really need to care about the good maintenance and operation. Right now here in Guatemala, we need to improve that. Not only with ethanol, but with and without ethanol. And the main question here in Guatemala, all the detractors says why it should be a mandatory use. It should be optional, that's the detractor says. And as you know, all the programs, the blending programs of the biofuels need to be mandatory. Otherwise, it will never happen. Next, please. We have a legal framework here. We have production, and we also have a law since 1985. It says that it has to be a mandatory E10 blend, but it doesn't happen. But basically, this is a current but inoperative law. And basically, there is one reason because it doesn't happen. Because right now, in this law, the Energy Ministry must set prices. And here in Guatemala, we have a free market, so that is impossible for the ministry to set prices right now. And this law also establishes production quotas in a current free market. So we are trapped in that legal framework, old-fashioned legal framework. Next. Well, next steps for us as association, right now we have different technical tables working, led by the Energy and Mines Ministry. We have also obviously active participation of these tables. We need technical assistance to drop off all the myths that are around this topic. It's already proven in many countries around the world. We need to reform the legal frameworks, but that's really tough. That will be really tough. And in Guatemala, we need to focus on the NDC goals and the GHG emission reductions. And basically, we have to establish the roadmap with the different stakeholders, like it's really hard to us for the association to as a professor says, to really implement this. And we have to convince all the detractors, but we are doing our best. And I really thank you your attention, and I also basically say thank you very much, Professor Horta, for the invitation. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Aida. It's interesting to see how diversified, as I said, could be the bioenergy scenario in developing countries. No, after the introduction of the cogen using bioenergy in Africa, Aida just present the scenario of a country where they are producing for a long time ethanol and exporting a certified biofuel, and they are not using that. Why? So they have already done trials and tests, and some legal barriers, some questions, some myths appear. And the question maybe is more public information, communication. We have already discussed this in a previous webinar. I think that they are doing a good job there, and they are, I hope, I'm crossing my fingers, that they are going to introduce effectively the national product in their fleet. Anyway, it's a good topic to retake the discussion in our Q&A session just after the speeches. Now, let me introduce you the next speaker, which is, again, a good friend of mine. I have met Rocio several times. No? She is the deputy director of the Stockholm Environment Institute in Africa Center, and is also in the Energy and Climate Change Program leader. Has done extensive work and has a large academic experience in sustainability assessment, environmental management tools and methodology, basically focusing bioenergy sustainability assessment and deployment in the bioeconomy. It's a pleasure to have Rocio Dias-Chave with us because she has a good experience in Africa and also in Latin America. He wrote interesting and seminal works on this. Please, we'll have more information about Rocio also in the speakers tab in our Hova platform. Please, Rocio, the floor is yours. We are interested to hear from you, please.
Thank you very much, Horta, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you also to the organizers of the BBEST-Biofuture. I have been very lucky to participate in some previous conferences with you, and I really appreciate this because, as you mentioned, I have different hats, so from Europe to Africa and Latin America. So let me present you this different topic also regarding the use of biomass, but within the bioeconomy context. And I think that several of the points that Stephen Karikesi presented, and also the speakers on the previous session about sustainability presented, are also integrated here. So this could be the question of if this could be an opportunity for developing a bioethanol market and other products that are associated also with the use of biomass. So if we can move to the next one, I think that it is also impossible because of the circumstances now not to talk about the impacts that are associated to climate change, environmental degradation, and disease, particularly for the Africa country. So the deforestation has increased over the past 2 decades. It is linked to over 30% of outbreaks such as Ebola, Zika, and Nipah viruses. But there have been many efforts also. You may have heard about the Regreening Africa and the Green Wall for Sub-Saharan Africa. So there are great efforts there. But climate change has also altered and accelerated some of these transmission patterns of infectious diseases, including Zika, malaria, and dengue fever. And this has also caused human displacement. And I think that particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic, inequality has been also greatly exposed. And also we have seen how supply chains are also vulnerable and have also put back food insecurity in several areas. Within the African context for bioeconomy, and I think this was also presented before, between 1988 and 2014, the world agricultural exports grew from $83 billion to over $1,500 billion. But the agricultural exports from some countries in sub-Saharan Africa were dominated mainly by unprocessed agricultural products. So they increased from nearly 3 billion to over $44 billion in the same period of time. But this share of world agricultural products declined from 3% in 1988 to less than 3% in 2014 because there is no added value. So majority or over 30% of East Africa's GDP can be directly attributed to agriculture and other bioeconomy related sectors. So if we see particularly for the case of East Africa, the land area for the countries, the agriculture and forest area, you can see just following Kenya and Tanzania that the agricultural area is still quite considerable regarding the land area, the total land area. And for the case of Tanzania, for example, the forest area is really larger than in the rest of the countries in the region. And when we compare the agriculture sector, which also includes the fishery and the forestry, this value added that it's in terms of percentage of the GDP, the total GDP, you can see that these countries in East Africa, including also Ethiopia, although it is not part of the East African Economic Community, but they were also considered for the study that I'm going to explain. Almost for all of them, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, South Sudan, and Burundi, almost 30% or a little bit more of a third of the GDP, it's from these agriculture, fishery, and forestry sectors. So this project that we have been working for over 2 years, it's on the East African Regional Bioeconomy Strategy. This proposal of this strategy was set up by Stockholm Environment Institute, the African Biotechnology Policy Resources or in the region, Bioinnovations, Sinovent, ISTECO, which is the Research Council for East Africa, and BioInnovate Africa, who is the responsible for many of these projects on bioeconomy in the region. So what we did with this project is to review all the available bioresources, and particularly for biomass that are in the region, and how through different processes, physical, chemical, biotechnological, we can produce different and alternative products to fossil fuel products. So we, through a different series of consultation processes, we came out with these different thematic areas, one on food security and sustainable agriculture, another on health and well-being, the third one on bio-based industrial development, so where, for example, biopackaging, bioprocessing, it's included, and the last one that it is on sustainable energy, which includes solid biomass with alternative uses such as briquettes and pellets, and also production of biogas from organic waste and advanced biofuels, as well as first and second generation biofuels. The next one, please. In East Africa, there are different definitions of bioeconomy, but at least for this strategy in East Africa, we consider the sustainable production, exploitation, or management of biological resources and knowledge to support this diversified industry, which includes these other different sectors from food, feeds, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and textiles, to the protection of ecosystem services and mitigation of climate change. So this is an economy that we want to put it as an innovation in bio-based product processes and business models in the region, and considering also this bio-based circular economy. The next one, please. So the overall process included, as mentioned before, different types of consultation, from the forms of national working groups to a regional drafting group, national consultations, case studies, regional consultations, to produce a final version of this bioeconomy strategy. The next one, please. And with this, we could set up as the core objectives issues related to health, environment, improved livelihoods and job creation, food and nutrition security, with a clear vision to produce this new bioeconomy innovative for sustainable economic growth and job creation in East Africa through collaboration at regional and international level, with a bio-based market and trade, to focus also on monitoring and knowledge exchange, and to help to contribute to these bio-based national and regional agendas. But there is one point that we have also to consider for the region and makes the difference between other regions such as Latin America and Asia. And this is the availability or not of infrastructure and logistics. These are two of the main challenges for the region. The next one, please. So we consider also with the different stakeholders that were participating in these consultations, the policy environment, the capacity development needed, the effective leadership and communication in the region, how to catalyze these relevant and productive partnerships and collaborations, and also how to enhance the bioeconomy innovation system, because there are some of these initiatives already going, but we need to really expand them. So how to really move them from the current situation where they are. The next one, please. So as mentioned before, one of the thematic areas that we set up is the advanced biofuels. So these considering mostly second generation biofuels from non-food products or agriculture and forestry residues, other lignocellulosic crops that could also contribute for a biofuel production, but also considering some crops that would not make conflict with supply of food, energy, and water, the production of liquid fuels, including bioethanol and biodiesel, probably for transportation, and also other type of small scale and third generation technologies. But this is really for the future. The next one, please. For the current situation, we want also to focus on some of the crops that could have, without extending in terms of the land use, but that could improve their production, their yields in the region. And as you can see, for instance, in the case of the sugarcane production, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda have great potential. And despite that, in the case of Tanzania, it actually reduced from 2016 to 2018, the production. There is still quite a large area to really contribute to it. The next one, please. And if we consider that from all the top sugar production countries around the world, Africa and sub-Saharan Africa has really a large extension for production and improving of the current production, not just in terms of the crop, but also in terms of the mills. Some of them are really advanced, as it was presented before in the case of Uganda, but some others are still really needing of great improvement for the production, not just of sugar, but also of ethanol, and also to consider cogeneration, and also to consider the alternative or the co-products that can be obtained from these mills. The next one, please. So we need to consider these different drivers. We need to consider also the bio waste and where we can add this value to the existing supply chains. Indeed, several of the supply chains that are in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly the ones we studied in East Africa, are really good. They have very wide knowledge about exporting their products, but there is no value added. There is no value added in the flour production. There is no value added in vegetables that are exported, despite that these are areas that are really important for economic reasons. They employ a large amount of people. But what we want to see with this bioeconomy is that there are really some of these final products that have this value added. The next one, please. So, for example, in the case of the bioethanol production, we did another study where we look at the production of bagasse, so as a co-product from the sugar cane mills, and how they could be this bagasse could be used to produce briquettes, non-carbonized briquettes, and used also in the tea processing sector. Some of the large processors of tea in Kenya, for instance, they are the boilers and the cogeneration system that they use are pretty good, but there are many other tea factories that actually do not have this and still use a large amount of fuel wood, which could be substituted at least partially by the use of these briquettes made from agricultural residues. The next one, please. So some of them, we know that they are still with not too many skilled jobs, but some of them are still producing or generating jobs in the region, particularly for women, which otherwise would not have another job, and that they can also be able to present a novel supply chain for certain regions where these briquettes can be used not just for the case of the tea industry, but also some other agri-residues industries and other type of food industries such as vegetable oil, food processing, that they could use this power for heating and drying. The next one, please. So other considerations are, for instance, the use of the ethanol production for cooking. There is a company based in Kenya that is Cool Cocoa Network, and they produce ethanol for cooking stoves, and it is a very advanced system that it is based on consumers' willingness to accept, and that you can see they have special types of containers and special types of dispensers for them. You heard in the previous presentation the case of Kakira in Uganda, which has a cogeneration system where they can also produce power. There is also the possibility of biogas, that it is used not just for household level, but also for other type of uses also in industry. The next one, please. But at the end of the day, and also relating it to the previous session, we have to consider all the trade-offs and synergies of bioeconomy and bioenergy, and that is implying all the social issues, which are the local communities, who is this benefiting, and including some of the regulations and voluntary standards, so that we can really fully acknowledge and apply these differences for particularly social and environmental within the bioeconomy, and that they can actually produce some better products. And we have seen several of them that are already starting in the region. Next one, please. And that if we can manage to set up this regional bioeconomy strategy, this will have also an influence on other strategies in the region and other policies in the region. So if we can really have this strategic view, joining the different policy agendas, so that we can also move towards a better sustainable development for the region. This could be another possibility for bioenergy, bioeconomy, and that has already been approved, this bioeconomy strategy. And now 2 countries in the region who participated in the project, Ethiopia and Uganda, sorry, both of them have started their own national strategies, and we are hoping that the rest of the countries will follow. So we will have this regional strategy that will govern across the region, but that each country will be also possible to set up their own bioeconomy strategy so that regional market can also be improved, and these different types of bioeconomy products that are ideally going to substitute fossil fuel products or contribute to improved supply chains will be developed for the region. I thank you very much for your attention. That is all. Thank you, Horta.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rocio. It was great to see someone put in even broader scenario the bioenergy, considering African conditions, but this could be applied in other countries, other continents. As you can see, and I already mentioned it, that the bioenergy requires this kind of open-minded perception. Thanks for such rich reflections about the potential, the risks, the synergies, and the trade-offs. We now go to the next speaker, but then we can recover these ideas and put it again in discussion. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you the next speaker. He is Damião Vitor Namoeira. He's the head of Renewable Energy Department at the National Energy Directorate, the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy from Mozambique. Mozambique is an interesting country with a large potential and also with is initiating to explore rich reserves of oil and gas offshore. So Mozambique offers an interesting context of how to promote both the fossil and renewable energy. And Damião is very opposed to explore this. Just recently, we could contact him, but I have the pleasure that he came with goodwill to offer us some reflections about that. We had some difficulties in connecting. I hope that now we can hear from you, Damião. Please, feel free. The floor is yours. We are interested to hear from you, my friend.
Thank you, Chair, for invitations. First, I would like to say that even Mozambique a huge gas reservoir. We think that to develop our country, we need to use all resources we have. So this we not leave resources from the bioenergy. That's important for countries also. Allow me to present to show my presentations. What I bring is short descriptions of what we're doing in Mozambique. Is our short strategy to promote bioenergy. Next slide. I'll start to bring our institutional framework. So if you see in Mozambique, the institution who lead in policy execution is the Ministry of Resources and the Energy. Institution where I came from, they lead energy sector in Mozambique. The other key institution within the government style, like of land and environment, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, and Minister of and Trade. The other is the Minister of Labor Social. Next, please. Thanks. In order to make use and enable use of bio feasibility, it is not to strengthen existing institutions in Mozambique with that private sector. We think that it is important to put incentives in the playing project and other issues in bio. So we think that to bring a private company to the government implementing bio project, is important to place a good framework, policy, good strategy that good is for the private sector. That we to approve a policy like a biofood policy and strategy. I lost my presentation, sorry. And the other like biofuel and the blends regulations. Next, please. This make that Mozambique. We think that that is not essential to Mozambique to make signature the around holds with the other institutions. So we signature conventions on the biodiversity and the 21 agenda 21 agent and the Kyoto Protocol of 1997, and we signed the Comprehensive Agriculture Development in 2011. Next, please. So this whole regulation we approved in the signature international convention shall take many companies to invest in bioenergy. Some of them they invest in the improved cook stove. We had 9 around the countries to promote to sell improve cooks. And then in biofuel we had 12 proposed, only 12 projects proposed. 2 projects reached the production stage in Manica and the Cabo Delgado. So in electricity generation, the country many express of interest only, but the only one in Maputo province and Maragra. We had one is the Maraga sugar cane project, who generate electricity the biomass. Please. So now the government think that to promote the new strategy of the government is to promote employment and self-employment and improve living condition for the persons. So in this we had a new way for the project, like in the Nyambani province. We had a project in coconut oil is a biofuel station and engineers. So one project with the new structure of the government. The other the other project we had, we are ongoing in the bioenergy project, is a project of heat energy by using to process. So in this project, rice husks residues substitute as a fuel source to generate for mechanical drying in a commercial rice mill. So the other project is the good project we can share with you, the jatropha fence around the small food crop field. What happens here is the populations put around the fields the the jatropha to protect from the elephant and the other apes. So now we have a partner is an union who help the government make a national biogas programs. I think we need to have to go in a biomass biogas project, because we started some in biogas, but we get a good result. We need to continue to start to try and to find a good result. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, friends, when we start this to organize this, we are in doubt about the resources, the potential that this platform offers. And sincerely, I am amazed with the potential of have friends from different places over the world attending, participating, collaborating. We have now colleagues from Maputo, as Damião recently speak to us. Again, people from Africa. Steve was he's in Kenya, and Rocio in London, and Aida in Guatemala. And we know that is with some problem could appear, but I think that with goodwill, you are having directly from the source information. It's very rich. It's missing one speaker, and I will talk on behalf of him because, unfortunately, Brian Haley from the US Grains Council just this morning tell us that he is sick, it is not possible to participate. But he had already sent his presentation. I select some slides just to to have the contribution of US Grains and Brian Healy. So, okay, we have here the first slide, okay, and about exactly the emerging markets. And the Brian, let me introduce him briefly for you. Brian is the director of global energy, global ethanol market development for the U.S. Grains Council. I will introduce you what is the organization, but he oversees the development and execution of the global ethanol program of this organization, including the strategic development, program implementation, public affairs, and strategic partnership. Recently, I attended a meeting promoted by US Grains in promoted jointly with OLADI, the Latin America Organization of Energy. It is one of the interesting initiatives of the US Grains Council. As you can see here, I don't know if the quality of the slides is enough for you, but you can see that they are in different continents with offices in different parts of the world, promoting basically, as you can expect, the US Grains production trade abroad. But in this sense, they are promoting the use of ethanol production in use, and it is very interesting, this kind of partnership. Next slide, please. Just few slides, I select that. Okay, so according to their vision, the main factors that drive the policy towards biofuel use are four. The agricultural producers' vision in order to promote new markets and stimulate the feedstock production. The second one is the environmental benefits associated with the decarbonizing transport fuel, and so contributing to the NDCs. And the third one is the human health benefits associated with the reduction of air toxin emissions. As you know, ethanol particularly reduces a lot the problems of NOx and other contaminants associated to the fossil fuels burning. And the third one, and the fourth one, is the economic benefits considering rural communities and for exporting savings in different countries. Okay, the next slide, please. It is related to the interesting to see how the government plays an important role. In this graph, what they are saying is that the large increase of ethanol production and use in basically United States and Brazil was driven by public decisions, as the Renewable Energy Directive and the Canada Directive and the US Renewable Fuel Standard, and in the case of Brazil, the introduction of the flex fuel vehicles and so on. Is this recent number that they bring to us is that we are production now in 2019 more than 100 billion liters of ethanol, 116 billion liters of ethanol, which represents about 3% of the whole demand of transport fuel over the world. Okay, but it's just a comment. I am sure that Brian could explain better than me, but calls our attention this kind of graph, the fact of the two biggest food and agricultural products exporters over the world are also the biggest producers of biofuels. Okay, so we're not affecting, in fact, the other kind of markets. If you are producing using the proper ways, we can produce a lot of biofuel and other Bs, okay, as of products of bioenergy. The next slide, please. So here he's calling our attention to the importance of coalition, of the cooperation, and the partnership has a role of biofuel market development in order to revitalize existing policies, in order to demonstrate benefits and tie into country and multilateral level efforts like to the Paris Agreement. We'll be back in this kind of discussion further and share technical knowledge around compatibility from global perspective. And in this direction, U.S. Grains Council is working with partners in local industry, government, and multilaterals like BBEST to support expanded biofuel use. I think that is the last slide, I guess. I was trying to not lose the contribution of Brian that was not possible to be with us this day, but on behalf of him, I am presenting you some central ideas that he would be addressing to us. Okay, now I think that we finally reached our Q&A session. I would just try to summarize a little bit the very rich reflections that you have from different perceptions of these our speakers that are showing the diversity, the different drivers that you have in our scenarios, and the potential of developing new markets in these emerging conditions and the difficulty that you are facing. We have some questions already presented to the platform, but maybe before, I'd like to open the floor for some discussion among us. Then we can go to the different questions. So if you have some additional comment, please feel free to observe and make that now. Just raise the hand and please enter. Okay.
Well, if
please, Stefan.
Yeah. One of the challenges I think our region faces is deciding which is the priority entry point to bioenergy development. In some cases, I think it is led by technical assessments in terms of what are the best resources that one has. But I think in addition, you can also look at the institutional side. Which sector is easier to enter into? And our own experience has been that electricity from biomass might be the first step that could be easy to start. And then from there, you can then move into the more challenging biofuel for transportation option. That has been our experience in the case example of Uganda. But I'm not so sure if that is true of other colleagues from other parts of the developing world in the Caribbean and so on who are participating in this, whether they have considered which is the best first step to start with. And perhaps even our colleague from London who has a more broader view can let us know what they think is likely to be a good entry point for developing countries.
Sure. Please, Rocio.
Thank you, Horta. And I think, Stephen, I think you are right. I think my experience looking at the situation in other regions, I think listening to the presentation from Aida, we had in Europe some time ago, this was around 2008, if not even before, a project called BEST, that was bioethanol for sustainable transport. And we had several cities involved in the project, and all of them were testing the vehicles as you are doing now in the case of Guatemala. So there are different entrance ways. The first one would be to really see about the resources that exist in the countries. I think the other one would be also about the different processing facilities that are in the region, and of course the markets are important ones. But many countries want to focus on the international market because, of course, it is an income for the country, but it is also possible, as we are looking at in the case of East Africa, at a regional market, and what are the possibilities in there. And I think that another point in terms of challenge is still having this difference between what is the SDG on access to energy has a great focus on electrification, and particularly for sub-Saharan Africa, it also involves a lot of power, heating and cooking as well. So probably the ethanol solutions for vehicles, as it was mentioned before, would not be at the moment the most relevant ones, but of course they can be kept in mind. But I think the rest of it for other processes in the region, it's very clear there is need for that, and it has to be improved. And I think that we have seen that also in the cases of West Africa and Southern Africa. So all these initiatives that have started, and we know that many of them were not successful in the past, including several of the aspects in Mozambique, that we also had a project there many years ago with the Imperial College as well. And also in Tanzania, we know what happened with some of the efforts of trying to use jatropha for diesel production, or ethanol for bioethanol production for vehicles. And we know that they were not successful. And this was probably also for the several of the regions of the reasons that were mentioned also before. Type of land rights, ownership, the type of production. But now there is more experience, and maybe with the strategies, considering, for example, this bioeconomy strategy, South Africa also has a bioeconomy strategy where biofuels production are also included. So maybe this is a way to start to look forward and try to harmonize them, because Kenya, for example, has recently approved their bioenergy strategy, or their bioenergy policy. So where do they are trying, how are they trying to implement it? Other countries are doing the same. So maybe this is something that can also be considered. And I know there is a question from Glaucia Sousa about the potential of oil from palm oil in Africa and in Latin America. I would say there is still some possibility, but palm oil in Africa and Uganda, for example, in East Africa, has been producing. It is originally from West Africa, but there are still other needs. I mean, the oil palm is used for cooking as well, and it has a big market for that. So maybe the oil production again for transport biofuels is not yet there, and it would be very difficult to replicate the story that has Asia. But Latin America has other successful stories, and Colombia has been one of them also with palm oil. And I will leave it there to allow others to contribute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jose. As you see, we are still in the diversity of sources of technologies. And I think that in these emerging markets, particularly, is very important to go to focus the most reliable and most mature technology. I am afraid about introducing second G in this context that we are already perfectly able to introduce the most practices. The point in this case is develop the market, the condition of using, not so the condition of producing, I guess. But let me enter in the questions presented by the attendants. It's a pleasure to have very good friends with us. Heitor Cantarella direct a question to Dr. Caracchesi, which is about the need of subsidies or mandates to promote bioenergy in your context. I think, it's, as you're not talking about liquid biofuel, is more question of feed-in tariffs. You mentioned that, but maybe you can add more information. What kind of public policy should be required to push these bioelectricity to the grid or in the different four schemes that you presented to us? Please.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. The situation differs from country to country, but I think one can make some general statements. In terms of electricity, I would say that electricity for all use in industry is a very straightforward investment. And many of the companies can justify the investment based on their savings they make from buying electricity, reducing the electricity they have to buy from the utility. But when it comes to selling the excess electricity to the grid, the feed-in tariff is absolutely key. And I think at the moment the region is quite attractive because of power shortages, and quite a few countries relying on emergency power suppliers. So prices of electricity are quite high. So as a result, feed-in tariffs can be quite attractive. So I would say that the electricity market is quite attractive and potentially may not require significant subsidies, simply reflect the current market situation. For fuels for transportation, it's a bit more of a challenge because especially for oil producers in our region, they subsidize the transportation fuels significantly. So those subsidies create quite a big problem for alternative biofuels. But for the smaller countries that are landlocked and don't have access to the ports, actually the ethanol, the fuel for transportation appears to be quite a good case, and a good case can be quite competitive. So that's how I would, characterize the market situation.
Thank you, Steve. I would like to add that a side effect of promoting the sound projects of bioenergy in a proper regulatory framework could open room for other kind of renewable energy. As you mentioned, besides the cogen using bioenergy in different places in Africa, the opportunity for small hydro appeared due to the reform of the electrical system framework. It's a positive aspect that is not bioenergy, but is rational in every sense. Okay. Now I will present for all of you a question, interesting question, bring by Renato Godinho, our colleague. Is a kind of good reflection, good question, in fact. What the speakers from Africa and Latin America see as the role of international development cooperation agencies and international finance institutions for bioenergy development in emerging markets, such as World Bank, ZAID, GIS, and others? Should this international development support community do more to incorporate bioenergy? Would that help, or it is not a relevant factor? What do you think about? I know that you are talking about very different situations, but your comment is very important to understand the barriers that you are facing and how to overcome them. Please, who can add? Okay, Aida, please go on.
Well, basically for Guatemala, that is a developing country, we really need the technical assistance from cooperation. Basically, the pilot plan we made it in last year, we asked help for the IDB. Maybe it's really important to us. I'm sorry. It's really important to us to have this help, because otherwise all the detractors are really tough. The detractors here. I'm sorry. The detractors here, we are having these old-fashioned myths, and we really need help from other countries or cooperation or technical assistance. So for Guatemala, it's really important to have this assistance so we can go forward to implement a blending program, especially I'm talking about ethanol blending. But I was hearing what Rocio says. Maybe in Guatemala, this is not a priority. Guatemala has his main energy mix based on the firewood. But that is a really complex problem that we have, and maybe this ethanol blending, it must be not too tough to make it happen. But right now it's really, really hard for us. But I think it's really important for Guatemala and the Central American region to have this cooperation help.
Okay. Thank you, Ada. Okay. Please, Damian.
Thank you. For our side, also is a very important to have international cooperation agency because play a very important role in helping to align countries' guidelines and helping to overcome some difficulty in implementing the guidelines. I say that because our policy and framework legislation made with the of technical assistance. Unfortunately, now we have only one technical assistant from the European Union. In the had a huge support for the international cooperation agency that we ensure the bioenergy from that I show in the our in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Damian. Please, Rocio, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that for the case of sub-Saharan Africa, there has been also a lot of support from these international agencies in general terms for bioenergy. This is not new, and I'm pretty sure that Stephen can mention that because I know that he has participated in many projects for a long time. There has been this aid, let's say, to support this. It has been not just for bioenergy, for this type of agri-residues or agricultural sector, or for the benefit of powering all these different type of industries. But I think, of course, we cannot forget that how much it has been invested, for example, on the cooking sector, that it is also very important for sub-Saharan Africa, and that it has also many other implications such as health. But I think that one of the areas where we are moving more and more is really on the financial side. So how much can this be supported by the private sector? How much it can be done by other type of financial sectors, like the private financial sector, that can really support some of these activities in the region. And maybe that is going to be something that will grow in the future if we manage to make more connections in terms of climate change and climate finance. I think that is something that could probably grow in the future, despite that the region is only 4% of the global emissions responsible. So all sub-Saharan Africa is only 4% responsible of the global greenhouse gases emissions. But I think, again, that the resources are there, and this is a good possibility. And as you mentioned also, Horta, it's not just for bioenergy, but in general for renewables. And we have to consider these different types of synergies across the renewable energy sector.
Okay. Thank you, Rocio. Well, I have one more question. If someone want to answer, is welcome. And then I have the results of the poll. Wait, we have a poll about the main hurdles to face to promote bioenergy in the emerging markets. Stay with us, it's very interesting. But first, a simple question about the role, not a simple question, but a question posed by José Maria Silveira, a colleague from Unicamp, which he is asking about the potential of horizontal cooperation. We just discussed the importance of the international agencies, support, technical support, this kind of thing. But there are also opportunities in terms of horizontal cooperation. This is the wording used by UN. And for instance, in Central America and Caribbean zone, I don't know, in Africa, you'll have maybe some opportunities. Any comments about that, please? Please, Stefan.
Yeah, I think there is enormous potential for cooperation across developing countries. One of the challenges we have found is finding information on the early stages of bioenergy development. You have countries like Brazil, like Colombia, and so on, who have done really well, and of course in parts of Asia, in terms of bioenergy development. But what they provide at the moment, they are quite advanced. So often you are looking at their early experiences. What did they do 40 years back to begin their industry? Are there lessons to be learned from that early embryonic experience? Because that is where many African countries are at this stage. And I think those lessons are really valuable. And any effort to compile case examples of what they did in the early stages of the ethanol industry in Brazil 30, 40 years back, when they had technical issues, limited expertise, what are some of the things that they did which we can learn from, as we are really at that stage at the moment? Yeah, that's one comment I'll make, and the value of this kind of horizontal cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Steve. In fact, demonstration effect is very strong when it is properly presented. The example is very useful as a way to convince people. No, I think that was the concern of Aida in the case of this demonstration process. Surely she was quite aware about there is no problem when using 10% ethanol blend, but they started there to put in the roads of Guatemala 34 vehicles to show them, okay, we are running with ethanol, no problems. The example is very, very strong. I expect that this example will spill over in Nicaragua, Honduras, and other countries. Is the kind of situation that you can expect it. So I think that you have not too much time, and I will be happy to introduce you the results of the poll. The poll was asking to the attendees about the perception of them about the barriers that are impeding the development of the regional markets, of the developing country markets, of these new frontiers for bioenergy. It's interesting that most of the people agree, 55% agree, that the main reason for the difficulty to push this bioenergy in these countries is the lack of an inadequate policy framework. So most of us believe that a proper environmental condition, institutional condition, is very important. Secondly, in lower degree, about 25% of the people agree also that the high costs of implementation, in the same sense, in economic aspects, the low fossil fuel prices, and in a more serious aspect, the technological challenge is also important, as well as the lack of capacity or local infrastructure, which is reminding us the importance of cooperation, either the international cooperation as a general sense or in horizontal cooperation. For instance, for many years, Malawi in Africa is promoting biofuel blends. Maybe their experience could be explained and used in another place. Just to mention one, other countries could be used also. And interesting also, not only the general agreement in terms of the main causes that are impeding the development of bioenergy in these emerging markets, but also what could be reasons that doesn't matter so much. They have very few votes, less than 5%, about 5%. There are three that is kind of reasons. That's very useful for us to know that, because many people claims that they are the main reasons. So the food and fuel debate, it's not so important debate. In fact, so far we can know in our countries, we have a lot of bounty of our potential to promote production of the many fees, food, feed, fuel, flowers, and there's no exactly a concerning question and a restriction. Of course, that you use the most efficient process, of course. But the second and the third one are also interesting. Doubts about GHG emission reduction and environmental issues. So, of course, they are important reasons, but they are not a kind of hurdle that are creating difficulties so serious to promote that. In this sense, after hearing from the general perception and the global perception and the trends that we do need to push to reinforce the bioenergy contribution to the global climate change mitigation, it is a consequence, not a main drive in the context of emerging markets. In the emerging markets, we have very primary objective as development, rural development, and energy independence, and the improvement of life conditions in many sense. And as a consequence, as an interesting consequence, we have also the reduction of emission, the reduction of consumption of fossil fuel, this kind of things. After this interesting result of our poll, I open the floor again for you, if you have some final remarks and comments. It was, for me, a very interesting opportunity to have you with us this afternoon, here in Brazil this afternoon. I know that Stephen and Damião is already more than, it's close to midnight in your country. Thank you. But even for everyone in the attendance also, I know that it was a good opportunity to reflect how to push to foster bioenergy in these places where these are very well posed to go ahead. Please, the floor is open. Please, Rocio.
Thank you. I think that my final remarks would be in terms of effectively this South-South collaboration, but keeping in mind the contextuality. It is very difficult to transpose technologies or policy frameworks from one region to another, but at least some other aspects, including capacity building and other skills, I think that is possible to do it also based on certain experiences, but keeping in mind, again, very much what is the contextuality and the innovation also in each of these regions. Learning also from North and South, it's also another big experience. As I mentioned before, even when we tested vehicles in Europe, it was not really possible to have the same market as it is in Brazil, for example. So this is the lessons learned and where it can be innovated and improved. Thank you.
I think
For Guatemala, I think my final remarks are going to be that it's really important to have the commitment of our government. Otherwise, implementation of any policy about bioeconomy or biofuels, it won't be possible. So we are also agreed that, of course, we need the government support, but it is a project that has to be established with the private sector, the academia, the society, because it's really important, and it has to be a really robust legal framework. Otherwise, it won't work in any time. It's really important to have a long-term policies and specific goals for our country, and it's really important to have that vision in a long-term vision. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm next. Yes, I think in my view, there are two issues that perhaps I'd like to highlight as the final remarks. One is the issue of employment. I think bioenergy is a very important source of employment for many of us in developing countries where we have a huge youth bulge, young people coming on the market and they need jobs. And I think bioenergy can really play a major role in that aspect. The second one is something that we are seeing is happening is because of the COVID crisis, oil prices had come down, but we are seeing oil prices starting to go up as people uh, emerge from the COVID crisis. And I think with the increase in oil prices, biofuels options are going to become much more attractive in the coming decade. So I think we need to make a case to our policymakers that they can meet their problems of employment as well as deal with the high oil prices that are coming by developing biofuels in a more aggressive fashion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to give us to show what we are doing. For our side, most the challenge we had is to give knowledge and experience, because without experience, even we have money, finance, or we have a good policy, we didn't make nothing. It's important we take a bioenergy project promote to promote employment to rural people, because I think it's possible to grow rural people with the bioenergy. We have a lot of information to people making money with the bioenergy. Thank you.
It is incredible. I have a power shortage right now. I'm sorry, it's not my fault, but I hope that you are hearing me.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I will see the recorded version to hear your final comments. I am using this kind of platform in the last almost year, and that's a shame. I have no more comments about that. It was really a pleasure to have you with us. I think that the main remarks have been addressed. I am one of the most concerned people about the importance of the emerging markets. So I am happy to have you with us, and thank you so much for you and for the support team that is in behind the scenes helping us in every movement I did. Okay, so thank you, and
Thank you.
for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Horta.